And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather, we have this slow-moving, slowly weakening low-pressure area out over the Bering Sea, keeping it windy and wet there for the Pribilof Islands. Also windy and wet here for the southwest coast, with gusty winds continuing all the way down into the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Precipitation along this frontal boundary, though, becoming lighter and more intermittent here as it weakens more or less in place, and isolated thunderstorms either side of that trough in the interior. And then for the day on Thursday, this front, again, mostly sliding off to the east here to the south of this high in the Gulf of Alaska. Windy, wet conditions over the eastern Bering Sea into the southwest coast. And the next system pushing rain, but not that much wind, into the western Aleutians over to about Adak. And for the day on Friday, this low pulls back to the northwest, weakens a little bit there. So winds will start to slowly diminish here along the southwest coast, with just some showers left behind here, some clearing for Bristol Bay. Partly mostly sunny here after morning low clouds, south central Alaska, Cook Inlet, especially into Prince William Sound. And rain slides into the eastern Aleutians, eventually the Alaska Peninsula. Scattered showers, isolated thunderstorms over the interior. And this system starting to be a threat there to the southern panhandle. And for the coastal water forecast, northwest winds 10 to 15 knots on the south coast, west-northwest at 10 knots for the north coast, south winds 10 knots, Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, west at 10 for Clarence Strait, with seas 2 feet for the inside channels and about 4 to 5 feet out here along the coast. And for the day on Friday, still light winds, 5 to 10 knots here for the north coast. Central coast, southeast winds at 10 knots. I know that front coming up from the south will kick up some small craft advisory southeast winds there along the coast of Prince of Wales Island. The seas building to 7 feet. Clarence Strait, southeast at 15 knots. Light variable winds for Lynn Canal and southeast at 10 for Stevens Passage. Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast, variable winds 10 or 10 to 15 knots. Cook Inlet, variable winds at 10 knots for the day Thursday, east at 20 for Kamishak Bay, southeast at 15 for the Barren Islands. And for Friday, southwest breeze at 10 knots for Cook Inlet, seas at about 3 feet or so. Light variable winds here. Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, Prince William Sound, and the North Gulf Coast. And for Kodiak Island, east winds 15 knots for Thursday. Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisory, south to southeast winds 15 to 25 knots. Bristol Bay, southeast winds at 20 knots with 4-foot seas. And for Friday, Alaska Peninsula, south to southeast winds 15 to 25 knots. Southeast at 15 for Bristol Bay. Variable winds at 10 knots now for Kodiak Island. And for the eastern Aleutians, small craft advisory, southwesterlies at 30 knots. Next ends all the way to Adak. And for the western Aleutians, variable to west winds at 15 to 25 knots. And then for Friday, western Aleutians, north to west winds at 15 to 20 knots, or more likely around 20 knots though. East-northeast at 15 for the Adak-Atka area. Seas only 3 to 5 feet. And for the Fox Islands, southeast winds 15 to 25 knots, seas up to 7 feet. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, small craft advisories, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, south at 30 knots for the Pribilof, seas 11 feet. East at 30 knots, St. Matthew Island with 12-foot seas. St. Lawrence Island, southeast winds 25 knots, east at 15 for Norton Sound. And for Friday, Norton Sound, no change, except more of a southeast direction on that 15-knot wind. Small craft advisories continue. St. Lawrence Island, southwest coast for those southeast winds at 25. East 25 for St. Matthew Island. South 25 for St. Paul and St. George. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow. East to northeasterlies 10 to 15 knots. Northeast at 15 on the central coast. 20 knots out of the northeast for the west side, and the Chukchi Sea, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. And then for Friday, south to southeast winds 5 to 15 knots for the Chukchi Sea. Northeast at 10 for the western Arctic coast. Central and east side here, winds will be east-northeast at around 15 knots.